There was a time when the North belonged entirely to steal and slaughter, when longships existed for one purpose only. But somewhere along the way, the raiders traded their axes for plows, and the men who once terrorized coastlines started tending crops instead. Old feuds cooled into memory, and villages that once braced for raids started worrying about harvests instead. This is the story of what happens after the killing stops, or at least what happens when one man tries to make it stop and what it costs him to try. We open on Einar, a quiet, unremarkable farmhand living out a modest, contented life with his mother and younger sister. There's nothing dramatic about his days, just fields, chores, and the small comforts of a family that still has each other. It's the kind of peaceful existence that never lasts in this show, and sure enough, it doesn't. In an instant, everything Einar knows collapses. His mother is cut down by an arrow while urging her children to flee, and before the grief can even register, raiders descend on his sister and kill her too. Einar is left with nothing, no home, no family, no warning that any of it was coming. He and a handful of other survivors are rounded up like livestock and hauled off to be sold as slaves. The voyage that follows is brutal in the way only human cruelty can be. Captives are cleaned up and paraded through a market like objects rather than people, stripped of any dignity they had left. Einar, still reeling, tries to make a break for it after swiping some food, and the punishment for that attempt is severe enough to break whatever spirit he has remaining. Days pass. He's picked over by potential buyers and passed up again and again, his expression growing emptier each time, until a merchant named Ketil finally takes an interest. Ketil doesn't care about muscle or fighting experience. He asks what Einar used to do for a living, and the moment he hears farmer, the deal is done. The estate Einar is brought to is nothing like what he expected. It's lush, orderly, almost idyllic, and for the first time since his old life ended, he allows himself a flicker of hope. That's when he's introduced to the farm's other worker, a young man named Thorfinn, son of the legendary warrior Thors. Once a merciless killer with a body count nobody could keep track of, Thorfinn now works the land in near total silence, a shell of the person he apparently used to be. Ketil lays out the arrangement for both of them: work the farm and, eventually, buy your freedom. It's not exactly generous, but compared to where Einar just came from, it might as well be paradise. The catch, of course, is the labor itself. Thorfinn leads Einar deep into the woodland attached to the estate, where their job turns out to be clearing an entire forest by hand. It's a task that could reasonably take a lifetime, and their reward for it, initially, is scraps, literal table leftovers thrown to them like dogs. Einar is furious about the treatment, but Thorfinn just absorbs it, staying quiet and compliant in a way that Einar finds almost pathetic. He doesn't understand yet that Thorfinn's stillness isn't weakness, it's something closer to exhaustion, with the entire concept of fighting back. They spend their days hauling timber toward the river, a task that leaves them barely able to stand by nightfall. During one especially rough stretch, Ketil himself happens to pass by with his household, and Einar catches sight of one of the women accompanying him, a woman named Arnheid, and is instantly smitten. It's a small moment of levity in an otherwise grinding routine. What actually surprises Einar, though, is watching Ketil the following morning. Rather than supervising from a distance, the landowner rolls up his sleeves and works alongside his laborers, something Einar has never witnessed from anyone with wealth and status. It earns Ketil a strange kind of respect, even from a man who has every reason to distrust people in power. Ketil's son Olmar, on the other hand, is a different story, entirely spoiled, cocky, and constantly needling his father in front of the workers, treating the whole operation like a personal inconvenience. That night, Omar sulks about being treated like a child and wanders off, eventually falling in with two of the estate's hardened guards, Fox and Badger, who are deep into their drinking. Meanwhile, Einar tries bonding with Thorfinn by sharing his tragic backstory, seemingly unaware that Thorfinn's own history makes his look almost tame by comparison. Elsewhere, Omar keeps whining about being babied, and the guards mock him mercilessly for it enough that the kid actually draws his sword on them. Bad idea. These are trained killers he's dealing with, and it doesn't take long for him to end up humiliated on the ground. Fox, in a genuinely disturbing move, suggests that the way for Omar to prove himself is to take a life, some rite of passage. The next morning, Einar wakes groggy and heads out to clear his head, only to hear Thorfinn crying out in the throes of a nightmare. Before he can process that, he crosses paths with Arnheid again and tries to start up a conversation only to get interrupted by Fox and Badger, who need both him and Thorfinn elsewhere. As they walk, Thorfinn explains that the two guards serve as the farm's protection. Eventually, the group arrives somewhere Einar doesn't expect, an execution site, with Omar apparently expected to be the one delivering the killing blow. Fox tells the condemned to submit quietly. Omar can barely hold himself together. Einar, unable to just stand by, lunges at Omar and the two grapple on the ground, and that's when Thorfinn steps in and offers himself up in exchange for Einar's life. Meanwhile, back at the estate, the farm's chief enforcer, a man simply called Snake, wakes from a nap and starts picking up on the commotion outside. Fox, incensed by Thorfinn's offer, decides to make an example of him and draws his blade, slashing at him repeatedly. Thorfinn doesn't so much as flinch. By the time Snake arrives on the scene, Fox is still cutting into Thorfinn, who launches into an unsettling monologue that visibly rattles his attacker. Snake has to physically intervene, decking Fox to shut the whole thing down, a satisfying moment of comeuppance. Later, once Thorfinn's been given food and is sitting there like he owns the place, Fox tries to apologize and then immediately attacks him anyway, only to get countered without much effort. It's enough to convince everyone present, Snake included, that Thorfinn isn't someone to trifle with, and Snake warns the others to leave him be from now on. Afterward, Ketil's assistant Peter tends to Thorfinn's wounds, and Einar is livid about the whole ordeal. Peter's advice is blunt: keep your heads down, do your work, remember you're still slaves with no real say in anything. Once patched up, Thorfinn gets dressed and heads right back out to chop wood, and Einar, curious about who exactly he's working beside, finally asks about his past. Thorfinn answers plainly he's killed more people than he can count, and the number stopped meaning anything a long time ago, telling Einar that he was same as the people who raided his village. Then, the matter shuts down for the day. That night, Einar has a nightmare of his own and wakes up in a blind rage, ready to strangle Thorfinn for everything he's done. But right as he's about to go through with it, he notices Thorfinn is in the grip of his own nightmare one, where the people he killed keep coming back to haunt him no matter how many times he defeats them. Watching this, something in Einar softens. He grabs Thorfinn and shakes him, screaming at him to value his own life and protect it no matter what, refusing to let the past define how he treats him now. It's the beginning of something that looks a lot like real loyalty between the two. Meanwhile, far from the farm, we check in on Prince Canute and the Danish army. Canute has changed dramatically since watching his father, the tyrannical King Seinen, get beheaded by the mercenary Askeladd. He's harder now, colder, locked into a war against the English alongside his fearsome ally Thorkel. Their campaign involves plenty of ruthless tactics, poison included, and Canute rules his men with an iron sense of discipline, explicitly forbidding looting even as he crushes every army in his path. When Thorkel, itching for more bloodshed, tries to push him toward continued violence, Canute shuts him down. The war, in his eyes, is effectively already won. Thorkel isn't happy about it. He genuinely believes a king has to carve out his throne through conquest and warns Canute against going soft. Later, a farmer offers Canute a hefty sum of silver in exchange for leaving his land untouched. Canute takes it as an insult rather than a gift, reading it as evidence that the man is loyal to the rival English king. He demands an apology and a show of allegiance instead, and when it's refused, he responds by torching the surrounding countryside, letting fire after fire bloom across the horizon as a demonstration of exactly what defying him would cost. It's a chilling, almost theatrical flex of power. Not long after, the reigning English king dies, effectively ending the war, and Canute finds himself crowned King of England. Back on the farm, Einar and Thorfinn are still grinding through their endless list of chores, stuck on one particularly stubborn tree stump that refuses to budge. They go looking for a horse to help, but nobody's willing to lend anything to a couple of slaves. While Einar complains bitterly about it, an old man overhears them and offers a trade. Help him with some tasks, and he'll lend them a horse. They agree, and it turns out to be an exhausting bargain, but a fair one, since the horse dramatically speeds up their work. On the walk home, they learn this old man is actually Ketil's father, and the true original owner of the estate. Lucky break, all things considered. The old man rewards their effort with a proper meal, and they end up eating alongside Snake, trading stories over dinner. It's also time to plant their seeds, which they do with a mix of hope and quiet desperation. Meanwhile, Snake is dealing with a rash of food thefts on the property. The next day, Einar continues flirting with Arnheid, and the two clearly have chemistry. She laughs at his jokes. He can't stop staring until her master calls her away and slaps her for the interaction, souring the mood instantly. Despite the setback, Einar and Thorfinn stay optimistic about their progress toward freedom, kneeling in front of their crops to pray for a good harvest before anything else happens. Elsewhere, Ketil's older son Thorgil arrives for a visit, every inch the seasoned warrior his younger brother wishes he could be. Snake greets him and hands over the thieves he's caught. Before any punishment is doled out, though, Thorgil settles in for a feast in his honor and uses the opportunity to rib his little brother, telling stories about their father's fearsome reputation as Iron Fist Ketil. Once the interrogation of the captured thieves begins, it comes out that their father owes Ketil money and skipped town rather than pay. Snake wants them punished harshly. Thorgil suggests amputation. Patter steps in and argues for leniency, hire them, let them work off the debt, and settle for a flogging instead. Thorgil ends up volunteering to administer it personally, and it's every bit as merciless as you'd expect. That same night, Thorfinn is plagued by another nightmare, dragged down into some kind of underground hellscape by relentless corpses, and wakes up shaken enough to tell Einar about it. Outside of these episodes, though, his daily life has settled into something almost peaceful, and his diligent work ethic starts stirring jealousy among the other farmhands. He and Einar, meanwhile, have grown remarkably close enough that it feels like they've known each other for years. Eventually, the old man decides it's time to push them further, teaching them to hunt and fend for themselves. But when they return to their plot, they find it completely trashed. Someone's destroyed everything they've worked for. Einar, understandably, isn't willing to let that slide. Still fuming, he runs into the culprits on his way home and confronts them, and Thorfinn ends up throwing the first punch before things spiral into a full brawl. In the chaos, someone lands a lucky sucker punch that knocks Thorfinn out cold. He wakes up somewhere completely unfamiliar, a peaceful, almost dreamlike garden, and briefly wonders if he's actually died. Back in reality, Einar is holding his own in a 3-on-1 fight, forcing the attackers to retreat rather than risk a real loss. In Thorfinn's vision, his late father Thors appears before him, confronting him about all the lives he's taken and the person he's become. The atmosphere turns cold and heavy, and soon after, the same corpses from his earlier nightmare drag him away as Thors watches him go. It turns out this isn't some metaphorical afterlife. Thorfinn genuinely finds himself transported to a version of Valhalla soaked in perpetual combat, and he's baffled to run into his old rival Askeladd there, chilling out like it's nothing unusual. Askeladd explains this isn't the glorious warrior's paradise of legend. It's reserved specifically for souls stained by needless slaughter, and only the truly corrupted end up here. As the dead close in around him again, Askeladd throws himself into the fight to buy Thorfinn an escape, a small act of atonement for everything he put the kid through. Thorfinn snaps awake and carries Einar to safety, the two of them having survived their own separate battles that night. The next day, both men return to work looking utterly wrecked, but they finally cleared out the entire forest, 3 years of grinding labor, all leading up to this point. With the next harvest, freedom is finally within reach. Even so, Einar can't stop thinking about Arnheid, who has no such path to freedom waiting for her, and it weighs heavily on both of them. Thorfinn opens up about his real dream, a world without war or slavery entirely. Ketil stops by to congratulate them on their progress, and promises to clear their remaining debt once he's back from a trip, even floating the idea of keeping them on as paid retainers afterward. Meanwhile, the newly crowned King Canute sails home and learns his brother Harald is gravely ill. Reflecting on happier days with his sibling and their late brother Ragnar, Canute finds himself unsettled by the political mess waiting for him. Harald controls Denmark while Canute rules England. When he visits his dying brother, the ghost of their father Swin appears to taunt him, and it becomes clear Canute is the one responsible for poisoning Harald in the first place, the crown apparently pulling something dark out of him. Later, alone with his father's apparition, Canute tries to justify the decision, insisting there can only be one true king. The following day, Canute spars with his second in command and proves surprisingly capable in combat, easing everyone's doubts about whether their king can hold his own, physically as well as politically. Afterward, discussion turns to finances. Canute needs a stable income to properly support his army and his kingdom. Around this time, Ketil, Thorgil, and Olmar head into town for a trade deal, gifts for the king in tow, while Olmar picks yet another fight, this time drawing a sword on an unarmed merchant. His father steps in, pays the merchant off, and in a strange twist of fate, they run into Leif, an old associate who once sailed with Thorfinn. Ketil mentions knowing a man by that description, and Leif is thrilled by the news. The group makes their way to Canute's court to pledge loyalty, where Canute rewards their generosity with an odd test having Olmar attempt to slaughter a pig. Olmar fails spectacularly, humiliating himself in front of the whole court. The next day, soldiers mock Olmar relentlessly for the failed test, and predictably, he snaps and challenges one of them to a duel. He has zero business fighting. He's outclassed immediately and starts sobbing mid-fight, but Thorgil, watching his little brother get destroyed, goads him into finishing the job using an opening the opponent leaves. Olmar manages his first kill. Thorgil, pleased, proceeds to slaughter the rest of the group himself with unsettling ease, treating grown soldiers like nothing more than practice dummies. Ketil is horrified. When Canute's soldiers try to arrest them, Thorgil argues the whole thing was a legitimate duel and cuts down anyone who gets in his way, a full-on act of defiance against the king. Interrogating a captured soldier afterward, he learns this entire confrontation was orchestrated as a pretext to arrest Ketil and seize his land. Furious, Canute declares war on Ketil's estate and mobilizes for an invasion, a surprisingly underhanded move for a man who claims to value honor. Though, given that he poisoned his own brother, maybe it shouldn't be surprising at all. Back with Leif, he signals to Thorgil and Ketil, sneaking them out of hiding, and reminds them of their agreement Thorfinn is supposed to be handed over unharmed. Meanwhile, back at the farm, a fire breaks out, set deliberately by one of the estate's imprisoned laborers. The estate's cruel overseer begs for mercy and gets none of it. Einar and Thorfinn, unaware of the chaos, are discussing Ketil's offer an appealing one, especially for Einar given his feelings for Arnheid. Snake, meanwhile, rides out to check on the old man and finds him unconscious age finally catching up to him. Arnheid comes by to cook and tends to him, and everyone shares a warm, almost normal dinner together, laughing at the old man's stubborn pride. It's the perfect opening for Einar to make a real move on Arnheid until Fox interrupts with news about the fire and the escaped prisoner. The next day, Fox and Badger track the escapee through the woods and find him asleep, planning an ambush. While they bicker over how to handle it, the prisoner wakes up and slips away. Meanwhile, Thorfinn gives Einar space with Arnheid. Choosing instead to get absorbed in a book, Snake happens to be reading a genuine surprise, since literacy among Vikings isn't exactly common. As Arnheid does laundry nearby, wincing from an aching hand, the escaped prisoner suddenly runs past, and Arnheid recognizes him instantly. It's Gardar, her former husband. The reunion is immediate and charged. Gardar compliments her, urges her to come with him, and Snake, unwilling to let that happen, cuts down his horse and challenges him to a duel outright. It's a tense, high-stakes fight, and Einar wants to jump in until Thorfinn holds him back. Snake dodges everything Gardar throws at him, and eventually lands a decisive blow, knocking him unconscious. Einar tries to argue with Snake as Arnheid breaks down sobbing. That night, the whole group sits in stunned silence until Einar proposes a plan to break Gardar free. Arnheid shuts the idea down immediately, insisting it's too dangerous, and finally tells them her full story. Her village once lived peacefully far from Danish territory until raiders came and Gardar led the men off to defend it, despite the women's protests. While they were gone, Vikings burned the village to the ground and sold the surviving women into slavery. Arnheid reveals she's secretly pregnant with Ketil's child, a fact she's had to keep hidden. Later that night, she says goodbye to the old man and sneaks off to see her husband. Outside Gardar's hut, she runs into Snake and begs to be let through. He refuses at first, but once he leaves, she manages to slip past the guards and tend to Gardar's wounds. When the men start harassing her, Gardar, clearly still deeply in love with her, snaps and reveals a far more violent side of himself. though Arnheid can't bring herself to finish the job when given the chance and freezes up instead. When Snake returns to find his men slaughtered, he vows revenge. Elsewhere, Einar and Thorfinn wonder aloud what's become of Arnheid and Gardar, and Thorfinn finally opens up about his violent past and how deeply war has scarred him. Trying to walk away from that life only seems to pull him back in further. War, he explains, is bound up with power and status in ways nobody's willing to give up easily, least of all the Norsemen who define themselves by it. He's still haunted by every soul he's taken, and Einar promises to stand by him regardless. Thorfinn tells him about a distant, mythical land across the sea called Vinland, a place untouched by all of this. Suddenly, Fox and his men come storming through, tearing the place apart, while Snake stands guard near the old man's hut. Einar bolts toward the hut with Thorfinn close behind, urging him not to do anything rash. Snake doesn't seem fazed by their arrival, and Arnheid puts on a calm front until she finally breaks down and confesses everything. Gardar is badly wounded and hiding under the old man's bed. It's a reckless, desperate move, but grief and love have clearly overwhelmed her judgment. Moved by her devotion, Einar and Thorfinn decide to help however they can, with Einar promising to protect her no matter what. Not long after, with tempers still raw and the estate on edge from the losses Snake has suffered, Snake demands Arnheid cook outside as bait to draw out the culprit. The old man tries reasoning with him, but Snake, clearly taking this personally after losing his men, won't budge. In a surprising turn, the old man tells Snake to take over the estate and inherit everything once he's gone. Just then, a hooded figure is spotted lurking in the trees, and the chase is on. It's Einar, deliberately drawing attention away while Thorfinn sneaks Gardar out and loads him onto a cart. Snake, his instincts screaming that something's off, eventually catches up to Thorfinn directly, and the ghost of Askeladd appears once more to spur him on. The two face off in what promises to be one of the show's defining duels. It lives up to the hype. Two masters, evenly matched in speed and precision, trade blows in a fight that's genuinely a spectacle. Every strike is timed, every dodge deliberate, and for a long stretch neither man gives the other so much as an opening. Snake, for all his skill, simply can't land a hit. Eventually, he manages to stab Gardar through the chest instead, believing him dead, only for Gardar to rise back up and catch him in a chokehold. Arnheid intervenes, pleading with Gardar to let Snake live, and the two of them escape together on the cart. As Gardar slowly bleeds out, memories of a joyful life flash before him, and despite everything he's endured, he dies peacefully in Arnheid's arms, reunited with his children in the next life. Back at the estate, Canute's forces arrive alongside Floki's men, ready to make an example of Ketil. Leif and Thorgil return just as word of the impending war spreads panic through the village. Fox grumbles about the situation while Einar and Thorfinn are tied up once again, their fate uncertain, as is Arnheid's. Thorfinn feels utterly powerless, having risked everything against Snake for what now feels like nothing. Ketil, meanwhile, storms back demanding to know where Arnheid is, and his wife fills him in on her betrayal. Devastated and furious, he's clearly on the verge of losing all composure. Snake refuses to let Leif anywhere near Thorfinn, unaware of the deal that's already been struck. Arnheid, tied up in the stable and harassed by one of the guards, is confronted by an enraged Ketil, who beats her without mercy despite her pleading that she's pregnant. Snake steps in just in time to stop him from killing her outright, a genuinely disturbing scene. Einar later meets with Arnheid and Peder, learning she doesn't have much time left. That night, Ketil rallies the men for the coming battle, while Snake privately acknowledges just how outmatched they are. Thorfinn tries explaining to Leif why he can't leave things unresolved, and Leif, refusing to abandon him, agrees to stay. Arnheid's condition continues to worsen. The next day, Snake spots Canute's warships approaching and positions his men on the beach for an ambush, but they're cut down by archers before they can do much damage. Canute sends a messenger demanding surrender. Thorgil, unbothered, points out that the invading force is barely 100 strong and mocks the odds, until Snake reminds everyone that these are elite warriors under Thorkel and Thor's old banner, more than capable of overwhelming their defenses even in small numbers. As he arms himself for battle, Snake shares the story of how he first met the real Iron Fist Ketil years ago, only to return later and discover the man now claiming that name and reputation was an imposter who'd stolen it wholesale. Despite the revelation, the villagers march forward anyway, with the fake kettle leading the charge. Thorgil and Olmar strategize privately, proposing a surprise strike aimed directly at the king. The battle begins, and Thorfinn watches helplessly as the plan to smuggle Arnheid away unfolds, except she's trapped in a delirious, fading state, running out of time. On the battlefield itself, Floki's Vikings tear through the defenders with brutal efficiency. Olmar breaks down in tears while Thorgil creeps toward the king like an assassin stalking prey. The invading warriors are practically enjoying themselves as they cut through the resistance. Fox watches in horror as Badger nearly dies, and it's only Snake's intervention and order to retreat that saves what's left of them. Kettle, confronted for the first time with the true horror of war, nearly gets killed himself. Thorgil seizes his moment and strikes at the king, who barely manages to block, but the blow shatters his arm, leaving him clearly losing the fight. Canute's subordinate spears Thorgil in retaliation and nearly finishes him off, forcing him to flee as the rest of the Vikings close in. Snake, meanwhile, finds Ketil alive and drags him to safety. Back with Arnheid, her final moments arrive. She sees visions of Gardar and her lost children and thanks Einar for everything he's done for her before passing away in his arms. The grief hits Einar hard for the first time. He understands exactly what Thorfinn felt watching his own father die. Thorfinn, trying to offer some comfort, describes the peace of Vinland once more and vows to reach it someday. Enraged, Einar goes after Ketil, and Thorfinn has to physically restrain him, taking a hit in the process before finally knocking some sense back into his friend. After Arnheid is buried, Thorfinn asks Leif for a little more time. There's one more conversation he needs to have with Canute himself. With the fighting winding down, Canute has his men gather the fallen and orders Floki to stand down. Olmar, overwhelmed by the carnage around him, finally caves completely. Inside the command tent, a fierce debate breaks out over whether to keep fighting. Snake argues for ending it despite Thorgil's insistence on pushing forward, and it's ultimately Olmar as the rightful heir, with the deciding vote who chooses surrender, bringing the conflict to a close right there. While that argument plays out, Thorfinn makes his way toward Canute directly. The guards refuse him entry and mock his claim of once serving the king, and one of them takes a swing at him. Canute, informed of Thorfinn's presence, initially ignores the request given their history. Despite a massive size mismatch, Thorfinn takes the hits surprisingly easily, and when Einar tries to step in, Thorfinn waves him off. Instead, Thorfinn makes a wager with the assembled soldiers. If he can withstand 100 punches without going down, they let him through to speak with the king. It's a brutal, one-sided beating in terms of raw size, but Thorfinn absorbs hit after hit, subtly rolling with each impact to blunt the damage. Snake shows up mid-beating and distracts him just long enough to cause his first stumble, urging him to stop, but Thorfinn refuses and takes every remaining hit all the way to 100. It's an absurd, almost mythic display of endurance, and everyone watching walks away with a newfound respect for him. Once he's finally granted an audience, Thorfinn confronts Canute about the tactics he's used and apologizes for the injury he once inflicted on him. The two talk things through, and Thorfinn makes his case for peace, urging Canute to abandon the endless campaign of conquest and rule differently. It works. Canute pulls his forces back, lays down his ambitions of military domination, and commits to ruling with something closer to wisdom and restraint. A few days later, Thorfinn and Einar say their goodbyes to everyone on the farm and set sail for home. Thorfinn's homeland feels like an entirely different world compared to Ketil's estate, quieter, colder, thick with memories he hasn't had to face in years. When he arrives, his own sister doesn't recognize him at first, having assumed he died alongside their father years ago. His mother, at least, sees him for who he is, noting how much he's grown to resemble his father and the reunion, while emotional is only partial. Since his sister remains distant and guarded toward him, unwilling to fully accept that the man standing in front of her is really her brother. The rest of the family welcomes him warmly enough to soften the sting of it. Looking back at everything these two went through, the slavery, the loss, the wars fought by other men that nearly swallowed them whole, it's easy to forget how far Einar and Thorfinn have actually come. They started this arc with nothing but grief and chains, and they're ending it with something neither of them had at the start, a future they get to choose for themselves. Still, after everything they've survived, both Thorfinn and Einar walk away as free men, carrying the weight of everything they lost along the way. But finally, undeniably free.